We're we're going to have a very difficult evening tonight, but I think it's very worthwhile. Tonight we have V and ARC. V is from the House Keys Action Network Denver, and ARC is from American Friends Service Committee. And they've put together a report that came out in the spring of 2026 called Housed in Isolation. And it is being presented by Shutdown Geo Aurora campaign. HAND is an organization you might not be familiar with. HAND and Shutdown Geo envision a future where individuals and families have a safe, warm, and dignified place to call home and raise their children, no matter where they're from. And they envision a future where we've ended the practice of separating and warehousing humans in cold, cruel facilities. And we have one right here in Aurora. ARC works with Jordan and Piper at the American Friends Service Committee, supporting organizations and individuals giving direct support to detainees and their families. Both of them are very articulate, and I think we'll have an incredible program tonight. I won't spend a lot of time introducing them anymore, but I think you'll find their words incredible. So thank you, V and ARC.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and thank you all for taking the time to be here for this. We really appreciate each of you. My name is Ark, and like Kathy mentioned, I work for the American Friends Service Committee. I see a few familiar faces on here. And my job at AFSC is coordinating the Shutdown Geo Aurora campaign. So I'm just going to give like a super brief overview of our campaign, and then I'll pass it to V to talk about the report and some highlights from the report. We don't want to be just talking at you the whole time, so if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. We want this to be interactive. We want to make sure that folks are following and understanding the things that we're talking about. So the Shutdown Geo Aurora campaign formally started in September of 2024. The reason that we exist as a campaign is because the contract for the facility in Aurora expires in October of this year, 2026. This is a contract that is between Geo Group, which is a corporation. It's between Geo and the Department of Homeland Security. Broad strokes, our demands are that they do not sign a new contract and that this facility is permanently closed. We want the people who are detained inside to be freed and not transferred to another facility. And we want the land to be returned to the people of Aurora and East Denver. And we have a lot of internal strategies and different working groups that we use to target different stakeholders. As we all know, or probably know, the Department of Homeland Security is not really a movable target. And so we've been focusing a lot of our efforts on every other level that we can apply pressure. A big part of that is political education and public engagement. So this meeting and things like it is an important part of bringing in more people into this work and growing our understanding. And, if each of you in this meeting goes and tells like 3 people about this, that's a huge deal. And it means a lot to have those conversations with the people in your life and people who might not be informed or who might have some misconceptions about the reality of this facility. So I don't want to go too much into like the structure of our campaign, so I'll leave it at that for now. I'll pass it, unless there are any questions, but I'll pass it to V to talk about the report.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ark. My name is V. I am with House Keys Action Network Denver, or HAND. We are a housing justice, racial justice organization that fights for the rights of people without housing to have safe and dignified housing. We work very closely with AFSC. I work closely with ARC, with Piper and Jordan, because immigrant detention and deportation have very serious implications when it comes to housing justice. And this is, over, various, there are various points in which that intersects. So on, the first point is our government is spending tens of millions of dollars that could be spent on safe, affordable housing for people in need, that could be supporting our communities to lead safe, healthy lives, but instead is supporting the government in disappearing members of our community and separating families and actually causing more economic distress. What happens is ICE has lately, and actually has a history of doing this, of targeting the breadwinners in communities. They go to work sites, they go where they know people are being productive and working hard for their families to find these individuals, to take them away. And that leaves a lot of the times a partner with small children at home who's now unable to pay the rent. So our organization, working with people on the streets, has seen huge increases in family unshelteredness and family houselessness. People all of a sudden on the streets that were able to make it before, but because of the increase of ICE detention and deportation, have been left suffering and having no way to pay the rent. ICE is targeting the Black and Brown community. It's targeting Indigenous relatives. And so all of this is further impacting people who are already suffering. And then, when you have folks living on the streets, when you have people living in their cars, this entire process and the way we've seen ICE transform into this, masked, there's a lot of ways to see it and say it, I suppose. But let's just say they are acting very much out of bounds. And when they're doing that, they're going into neighborhoods, knocking on doors. And we saw when people try to drive away, what can happen and how ICE officers can escalate their violence. So just recently, I was speaking to a mother who was living in her car with two little girls, and she was saying, if I had happened to have my car parked in a neighborhood where ICE was, or where there were protesters, or who knows, I could have been a Renee Good situation. And so all of these factors are very real and very important in that conversation. When we talk about the report, there's a lot of those themes present because HAND did play a very central part in anchoring this report. And you'll see things like on page 9, an example of when they refer to, this is a photo from inside the GEO detention facility, and it's a poster, and it says telephones provided in housing. And this kind of language isn't accidental. This is very intentional. This is very divisive. It is weaponizing the idea of housing and suggesting that certain people, certain communities deserve their situations, that this is normalizing that situation for them. And so we need to pay extra attention to how this is being stated and how language is being used in a weapon to further continue these very brutal, violent processes and systems in our communities. So, yeah, that's a hell of an intro. Oh, I mean, a heck of an intro. I'm sorry. I don't know. I, um, yeah, thank you for having us. Thumbs up.
Why don't you talk a little bit about how you put the report together?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to be, this is a sequester of a series of quarterly reports that we're going to be doing. So we are already very connected to people on the inside of the detention facility, AFSC, HAND, and some of the other folks. We're speaking directly to people and had various open-ended questions and conversations with folks about conditions. So this particular report, we used around 31 submissions that we received from these different groups. And these were complaint forms, and they covered different topics. They covered medical concerns, living conditions, guard behavior, and food insecurity. And so this was a very brave thing for people on the inside to do because the phone calls are recorded, visits are recorded. And it's very possible that you'll have someone from ICE listening into the conversation that you're having. And so people who were submitting these reports were very much pushed to the extreme. They were suffering under such conditions that they were putting themselves at further peril just to be able to get this information out there. So we wanted to be very careful with the data and very true to what the data was and very true to what people were saying. So this report involved data analysis of those complaint submissions, and we took those and we decided to categorize every single time somebody mentioned a concern under these 4 categories. And then from there, we were able to create percentages. And so the way that this report is laid out, the main topics aren't just something that we came up with. These were ranked and they are ordered in the order that they are most mentioned. And so as you read the report, you're reading it from level of presence in terms of complaints. We saw a lot of themes come up. Medical concerns was the top one that appeared. And it was, yeah, devastating to hear the kind of suffering that people go through. And I see, yep, there's a question there about the report. There's the copy of the report in the chat, so feel free to follow along. And it took a lot of work. So these reports, we had to read through those different submissions many, many times. And the quotes are pretty daunting. Each of the sections actually starts with a quote. And we have quotes throughout the report as well. And that's just to make sure, again, that we're giving as many opportunities for the voices of people who took that risk, who wanted this to be known. We're being heard. And I just opened to a random page. I'm gonna go ahead and read one of the reports, one of the quotes. So on page 16, and these complaint submissions are filled out by volunteers who go there and talk to the people. And actually, you're not allowed to have any technology when you go and visit GEO. So if this is an in-person visit, people are writing things on a notebook. Sometimes the guards don't even let you bring a notebook, so people have to hide a piece of paper and a pencil somehow to be able to do this because we're not allowed to have any metal. We go through very serious screenings to get inside, and you only have an hour. And so, people went to great lengths to get this information available. So here's a quote from a volunteer in a complaint submission. And the name was redacted for their privacy. She has been having dental pain that has not been checked yet. It hurts to eat, and it also gives her a hard time to go to sleep. She also told me that there are a lot of people who are struggling with mental health issues. There are some women that will scream at night. She said that one of the women that screams is very, very sick, extremely pale and skinny. She said that when it is her time of the month, the woman that is extremely skinny, she doubles down in pain. That was something we had heard. Dental pain was often mentioned, severe mental health conditions to where people are screaming all night and it becomes a constant background noise almost, are things that came up through what people were sharing.
Can
So
you talk a little bit about what kind of treatment they get in the detention center?
absolutely. Yeah. I love that. Thank you for bringing that up. So in the medical condition section, they're, like I said, they're ordered in order of the most mentions. The very first theme was the new diagnoses from being detained. So we saw a lot of people reporting that all of a sudden they were having health conditions and diagnoses that they had never had before. This was problematic on many levels. Obviously, it shows that people are put in such conditions that their mental and physical health is deteriorating in this place to where all of a sudden they are facing more problems. It also shows links to dietary issues, the fact that the food is not meeting a standard of nutrition or value or caloric intake. And we talk about that in food in that section. And actually, with mental health, it was interesting because people who really truly needed help were not having access to their medications, were not having the ability to continue treatments or see a therapist. But people who went in for other medical conditions, like physical conditions, they were oftentimes gaslit. They were told that they had a mental health condition. We had 3 different incidences where people reported that someone was told that they were crazy, psychotic, inventing things. And these have real implications on people's immigration cases, on whether or not they're deemed well enough for court or for trial or to speak on their own behalf. And so people are experiencing that at a whole new level, which was very frightening to see that as a theme. And then in
Um,
terms of
sorry.
yeah, sorry.
Um, and being diagnosed with a mental condition could also affect the decision that they make on their immigration case, right? So
Yes.
it prevents them from being granted asylum or something. Is that true or?
Yeah, it kind of regardless harms their credibility. Around 70% of people that are currently in immigration detention do not have legal representation. And so what that means is a lot of people are forced to represent themselves in court, which is obviously very unjust and it's not due process. But what that could mean is if someone has to represent themselves in court and they are diagnosed with some sort of mental condition, that could destroy their credibility to represent themselves.
Right.
And if they have a lawyer, it still has a negative impact.
Absolutely. If you've ever seen an immigration case play out in court, they are so much built on credibility and on building a narrative and understanding that narrative and having proof of it. So as soon as you call that into question, it calls it to question any evidence that someone has brought forth of having like credible fear of being deported
Hmm.
back. Are they actually afraid? Are they actually at risk of being killed when they're deported? Or are they in psychosis?
Right.
Right. And so it has real implications. And then we had, the opposite side of that coin, right? People who do have serious concerns. We had an elderly man whose physical health was deteriorating, whose mental health was deteriorating, who was not able to continue his treatment while inside. And it wasn't until he attempted suicide that he was actually taken to the hospital and then put on suicide watch 24/7, which he
Do we have any information on the licensed medical psychiatric personnel who are determining these diagnoses?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. It's an important one. So currently there is it's a little complicated with the medical staff at the facility. There is one physician who is full-time at GEO. His name is Dr. Kerry Walker. So there is one physician for anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 people. Then there are a handful of LPNs and I believe 3 RNs who are there full-time. So it's pretty bare bones. There's not psychiatric care on site. So a lot of times what that means is that the people have to get a diagnosis and then they have to be brought somewhere to get the treatment that they need. That is if they get the treatment that they need. And it's interesting because one of the questions that we get often is why don't we try to improve the conditions in this facility instead of closing it? We can try to make things better or more humane. And that relates to this doctor, Dr. Kerry Walker. So he is actually currently being sued for malpractice. On page 18 of the report is where that information is. But this is a story of a man who passed away inside of GEO. His name is Melvin Calero Mendoza. And what happened to Melvin is he was playing soccer and he hurt his toe. And Dr. Kerry Walker failed to diagnose a blood clot that was in his leg. And so he was never referred to a higher level provider, which would have been what needed to happen in this situation. And he passed away. He had he has two children. And yeah, it's an ongoing lawsuit. If you want to learn more, that we do, obviously we have included this in the report. But if you just look up his name, there is information online about complaints related to him. So yeah, kind of regardless, it's a lot of responsibility for one physician to be responsible for all of those people, but especially when he is actively being sued, we think that's a huge concern, and we don't want more people to die. And we are very concerned that that is going to continue happening, as we have seen in detention centers around the country, especially this year. A person is dying every 6 days, and we don't want that to happen in this facility or in any facility.
Um, if somebody comes in with medication, they would still get it or they wouldn't. I mean, is that part of this?
Yes. Yeah. So we do have a section, page 16, and it talks about lack of treatment for pre-existent medical conditions. So the majority of this was for physical conditions. Around 85% of the people who mentioned that were specifying a physical condition. And then the other 15% were for mental health conditions. And they were basically saying, things such as dental infections, dental pain, gastrointestinal infections, ongoing conditions like GERD, IUD related pain, things like that were not being treated. And people complain. I have a friend inside who was being treated beforehand for Lyme's disease and also and actually, when he got there, he started developing a rash from the underwear being too small. And it just got worse and worse. And they tried various different creams. So they did actually eventually have to start treating him. He did not receive the same medication that he went in with. He had doctor's notes. He was very organized. But they basically refused to treat him for his ongoing condition. And then for what he developed in there, it took a lot of complaint forms that he would submit again and again and again until they started to listen. But not everyone is heard. I think it actually was a benefit that he spoke English. He spoke around like 5 different languages and was from Ukraine. And he was also someone, though, who unfortunately his insistence led to him being diagnosed as mentally unfit and unwell. They diagnosed him with schizophrenia, which he's in his 30s. He had never in his life been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And we actually had a volunteer go in who is a therapist and did an evaluation on him and was able to write a letter stating that that was not an accurate, diagnosis. So, yeah, so
Yeah.
yes, we did get, 20 different mentions about the fact that they were not being treated for medical conditions that were pre-existent.
And then were there other kinds of medical issues?
Yes, absolutely. So going back to this doctor, another reason that we highlighted and did a bit of a expose on this physician is because we had 2 separate incidences where people reported, and actually we saw in one case somebody was brave enough to release the medical notes, who is still detained but released medical notes, and showed us that this particular physician had prescribed medication that resulted in severe allergic reactions that ended up in hospitalization for 2 different individuals. And keep in mind, this report is for a span of time. This is a quarterly report. So when we're talking about these numbers, this is what we're seeing. This is an example of what happens over the span of a few months, right? And so when you're looking at it from that lens, the fact that you're going to have two people who report out of the many people who choose not to report for fear of how it could impact them, saying that they had negative adverse reactions to the point where they were hospitalized. This was something that not only did those individuals report it, but other individuals who were detained referred to those incidences and said, I saw this guy get hospitalized. So people are being put at great risk by somebody who's not able to be on top of a caseload of 1,200 individuals and probably, is experiencing. I mean, I actually don't want to give any reasons or credence or rationale for why this position is doing what they've done and why they're not treating properly. All I'm going to say is that clearly, the support is not there.
All right. Any other medical problems that you discovered there? Are they getting um, adequate response to medical emergencies and things like that?
Yeah, so I did want to also go back to what you talked about, the treatments provided, right? And so are they getting medical response? So we got around 93.5% of all the people who were reporting about medical conditions. They talked about like some kind of treatment, but this also included things like the advice to drink water was a form of treatment. And when we're talking about medication given for a wide spread of symptoms, people were given ibuprofen. They were given ibuprofen for general body pain, chest pain, fevers, flu, headache, uncontrollable vomiting was treated with ibuprofen. And that was multiple incidences that reported that. Benadryl was given, and again, that was administered also in the cases where there was the severe adverse reaction before the people had to be hospitalized. And, sometimes they're given medication. People didn't specify or didn't know exactly what they had been prescribed for a variety of conditions, from high cholesterol to excessive mucus, headaches, high blood pressure, kidney stones, and things of that nature. There was someone who reported also being an individual in a wheelchair in this place. And when we're talking about, folks with PTSD, sleeping medication is something that has been administered. And PTSD is actually also a new condition that people have developed from the inside. And also pre-existent in some cases. It was pretty heartbreaking to talk to an individual who was very vulnerable about some trauma that he had experienced in his childhood and discussing how being in such close proximity and living quarters with grown men and having no privacy was incredibly triggering to what he had experienced, understandably and horribly so. And so it was so exacerbated that he received the treatment of sleeping medication to be able to sleep at night. Right. So very difficult. I guess another aspect that came up, and not just from us working with folks who are detained, but also from their loved ones. I think when we're talking about conditions that are caused by detention deportation, the impact is far reaching. It's like a ripple effect in our community. So the loved ones of these people, I mean, folks are experiencing PTSD, trauma, and depression and anxiety from all of a sudden, the huge stress and burden of having to manage a household by yourself, not having your partner anymore, not knowing if they're going to be okay, not knowing if your partner's receiving the treatment that they deserve to be receiving, not knowing if your partner's being treated as a human being. There's just a lot of strain, and actually, our volunteer therapists who go in oftentimes speak to not only folks who are detained, but also to the loved ones on the side and provide support there about, going through that and managing the grief and the trauma. And so it's really a compounding effect. It affects the young children. I've heard multiple times reports from parents saying, my kid used to be so rambunctious and playful, and now they're getting in trouble at school because their dad's detained. And all of a sudden they're having tantrums, and they weren't having that before. And they're breaking down crying, and they're causing, they're starting fights because they don't know how to emotionally process. And then I've even heard of, my dad was detained, so now I'm the man of the house. And you have to remind a kid, actually, you're 13 years old,
Mhm.
right?
So what was the next highest category?
Um, yeah, let's see. Yes, living conditions. So page 21 starts the chapter on living conditions, and we have a quote there. He sleeps next to a cold wall, and the vents are always blowing cold air. Says lights are on 24/7 and television also. They put the volume up really high. He doesn't sleep very well, usually stays up until around 3 a.m., reading the Bible until his body just gives in. Um, this so really important page that we have, and it's not just in this report, it's in the original quarterly report, and we're going to actually include this in every single report because it's very impactful. On page 22, we actually had somebody on the inside who was a professional artist and was able to very accurately draw and depict what the living situation is on the inside, because we don't have exposure to that otherwise. You can't, like I said, there's no technology. People can't take photos. Actually, even during video calls, there is every once in a while, people have access to a tablet. I think they have a handful of tablets that they share across the 1,200 people. I think let me look right. I'm gonna be sure. And so, even in the tablets, the video blurs the background. You can only see the person you're talking to. So there is no way for loved ones to truly understand, the nightmare that their partners, their family member, their friend is going through because it intentionally blurs the background. So this section was really important. We talk about the extreme temperatures, the freezing element. This is something that we're seeing not just in Colorado. This is something we're seeing across the board, across the country at detention centers. And later on, we talk about sleep, and actually, extreme temperatures is one way that they are taking away the sleep from people. And I'll talk about that later in a bit. But like, it's to the point where they're potentially violating conventions of international torture in how people are being deprived of sleep in these institutions. I don't know if you want to talk about temperature or.
About this.
Okay, yeah, I'll talk about the next one.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about money a little bit. So it's worth mentioning that the Department of Homeland Security pays GEO Group anywhere between $150 to $200 per day per person that is detained inside the facility. And so that is, yeah, it's a lot of money. That is our taxpayer money that is going towards this nightmare. And so an interesting part of that is that if you are detained inside of the detention center, if you want to call your loved ones, it costs money. So you have to pay to use the phone. A 30-minute phone call with your loved ones costs $5. So if you want to make money to be able to call your loved ones, you have to participate in what GEO calls a voluntary work program. So what this means is that people are paid $1 per day to work inside of the facility, in the kitchen, in laundry, cleaning, painting walls, lots of different things. So it's 5 days of work for one 30-minute phone call. If you want to supplement your food because people don't receive enough food inside, then you can buy food at commissary, and that costs an exorbitant amount of money as well. So people are kind of forced to choose if they want to eat enough food or if they want to talk to the people that they love and care about. And so this voluntary work program, GEO is currently being sued for this. It's a class action lawsuit that started in 2014, and it was started by a man who was detained in Aurora. And this lawsuit is ongoing. The Supreme Court recently decided that GEO Group is not immune, essentially, because what GEO had tried to argue is because they're in a federal contract that they have the same level of immunity that other federal facilities have, and the Supreme Court said, no, that's not true. And so this voluntary work program is an ongoing issue, obviously, and yeah, it's on purpose in a lot of ways because for people to use the tablets or to message people online, that's through a third party app, a corporation that is making money. The commissary is a third party corporation making money. So it's kind of, yeah, it's just a loop of uh, making this ridiculously low amount of money and then being forced to spend it to survive. So that is something that we highlighted. And yeah, there's more history in the report as well, and some more information about um, the lawsuit, which is really interesting. And yeah, I think that's
Why
it.
don't why don't why don't you talk about what the minimum wage is and what the difference between $1 a day and the minimum wage?
Colorado minimum wage is $15.16 per hour. So people inside GEO in this voluntary work program receive 13 cents per hour. So that means that it would take someone who is in detention, they would have to work 117 hours inside of the facility to make the Colorado state mandated minimum wage. And then, as we mentioned in the report, if someone wants to buy a can of chicken breast, like the small canned chicken, it's $17. So
And a sweater? If they were cold, how would they get a sweater? Do you know? I mean, I know you don't have the price, but they would have to buy it, right?
They actually can't buy a sweater. They get access to one jacket per person detained. And there are instances where people tried to get a jacket from someone who was deported or sent or transferred, and they actually got punished for doing so, for attempting to have a second jacket. Same with blanket, same with towel, I think. And so, yeah, so people are punished for holding on to somebody else's or using someone else's. They are given one set. And it's really worth highlighting what Ark was saying. The jobs that people are working, kitchen, laundry, maintenance through painting. I mean, these are cleaning. They do not hire staff to do this. So how do you justify paying Geo Group Aurora $47 million per year when the people who are detained are getting paid 13 cents an hour to maintain the facility? How do you justify that? I mean, when we live in a country where, a lot of folks who are in there, are there because they were quote unquote working illegally. And so you are hiring them to do all of the work inside the facility. You trust them enough, clearly, to believe that they're going to do a good job. And here you are absolutely abusing them. And so in the report, we do create the connection to sharecropping because in sharecropping, it was like this new form of slavery where, free farmers basically on, a land that was owned by white plantation owners. They were quote unquote paid and yet had to buy everything they needed to live from the corner store that was feeding back into the owner's pocket all of their earnings. And oftentimes people would go in debt getting the necessities that they needed to live from the store. And so a horrible system.
Yeah. And I think that I read in this that Geo's corporation increased their profits by 700% last year.
100,
How much?
8% in 2025.
Yeah,
And for right?
right.
What do you pay for? I mean, the profit margins are insane.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
ignore.
listen, it's already 11 after, so can you guys stay a little later than
Yeah.
Yeah,
7:30? Okay.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Well,
I thought.
let's get going on some more because there's a lot in this report that's really concerning.
Yeah, I just want to briefly answer the questions that are in the chat. Are the families able to contribute to an account for their loved ones? Yes. It's through an app. There are a lot of complications with that. One big part of it is that you have to be able to find your loved one, which is something that we highlight at the end of the report. But when people get transferred to different facilities, they go missing in the ICE detainee locator, which is an online platform. Your funds also don't transfer between facilities. So if someone put money for your commissary at the Aurora facility and you get transferred to the facility in Florence, Arizona, that money disappears. You don't have access to it anymore. And then as far as Colorado suing as a case against state law for the hourly wage, it's interesting because the organization Towards Justice, which they have a few attorneys on their team, and one of the attorneys is David Seligman, who is running for Attorney General. Towards Justice was supportive with the class action lawsuit from 2014. As a campaign, we have gotten the opportunity to ask all of the candidates for Attorney General for this upcoming election in Colorado if they would take meaningful action to sue on that regard, and also there's a lot of things that that they could sue for. Yeah, that's obviously something that we are interested in, and all of the candidates that we were able to speak to indicated that they would be supportive of that. I'm not sure why our current Attorney General has not done more related to the facility, but alas, that's
And,
yeah.
and one other thing I wanted that you guys to bring out is what if they didn't have any money? What would happen? You couldn't contact your family. I mean,
Correct.
what would happen to those people and do they share among each other and things like that?
Oh, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up. Actually, that was something that we said we would really want to get into in the next report because we want to show the resilience of this community. We want to show how people do look out for each other. And there are some examples of people taking action despite these conditions. There are examples of people protesting for rights. People do so in a variety of ways. Which I can't remember right now in this moment for some reason.
Of resilience.
Yeah, or the ways people protest and such.
So yeah,
Oh,
well,
hunger strike.
and with the phone thing
That's very-
specifically, like yeah, if people will make friends, and so if someone has a little money on their phone account, they'll let that other person make a call. If you don't have money and you don't have friends, then you are disappeared and they can't find you. There was some interest in a hunger strike, but again, the malnutrition is so severe in this facility that that hasn't come to fruition. Which is there are other facilities in the country where people have done successful hunger strikes. Another thing, while Jeanette Visqueda was detained, that she was interested in and pursuing and is still pursuing with people that are still detained, is attempting to boycott commissary at least for like one day out of the week, which obviously she is free now, and we are very grateful about that. But there are different levels of resistance. And with Jeanette, like her argument for that is that, yeah, they shouldn't be spending the money that they're earning, or they should try to spend less of it on the facility itself.
And yes, people do share also commissary funds. And there have been times when some of the folks that we've supported, we were able to put funds in their commissary and they would let us know. They'd say, hey, I actually ran out a little bit because there are some guys here that aren't connected to you that don't have loved ones. And so, I wanted to share some of that. And we've seen that happen on various occasions. So people look out for each other in the worst of circumstances.
Thank you.
I guess for sake of time, I don't know if we have enough time to go into a deep dive of the rest of the report. There's guard behavior. and the themes that were expressing. I do want to read the quote. I think it's always important to hear the voice of people. So this was a direct quote. If any one person in the detention center does something wrong, they will punish us all. For that reason, they would take away everyone's access to microwaves, tablets, access to phones, like the payphones, even for small little things. If people were verbally arguing, they would be put in solitary without access to anything except food. So the biggest theme that we hear from is solitary confinement as the leading complaint. Guard behavior. While most of the reports we got were within the legally allotted range of 15 days, which is still horrifically cruel, but legally allotted 15 days, there were reports of folks who were in solitary confinement for over 3 months. We had a very concerning case of somebody who was set to be deported. He lost his case, was set to be deported, had helped the US government in his home country against the country's government, and so was certain he was going to be killed because he had photos with him of his brother who was murdered. And so when they put him on the plane, he refused to step off the plane. He did everything in his power not to because he said, I know what will happen to me. And so he was returned to the facility and placed in solitary confinement for months. And we weren't able to visit. It was horrible, and they kept coming up with reasons why we couldn't visit him. And then eventually he was transferred out of state. Then we have a lot of reports of general attitude. We have reports of arbitrary and capricious action, like punishing tablet usage, dumping out commissary items that people had stored in their container, having an extra storage container. They would, target you for that. Getting in trouble for using additional blankets and things to stay warm, like we talked about. And guard actions have huge implications too, because if a guard decides to, and this happened as well, decides to withhold food from someone and physically pulls the tray away from them, claiming that it's their second portion when they never had their first, and then in that struggle ends up falling, that person ended up getting pinned with assault on an officer, and it was about to impact his immigration case. Thankfully, we had connected him with a lawyer who was able to push them to review the footage and clarify and confirm that there was never assault on an officer, so it did not ultimately. But if that lawyer hadn't done so, if he didn't have a lawyer, that would have absolutely tanked his immigration case. And this was someone actually who was detained on his way to work. He was a janitor at Anschutz Medical Hospital and was working for quite some time there.
So like with solitary confinement, there's no appeal. Are there standards for when someone is subject to solitary, or is it just arbitrary?
Yeah, so, and thank you for bringing that up. We talk about that in the report. Submissions indicate no predetermined standard for placing people in solitary. Verbal altercations amongst people detained can result in solitary. And oftentimes when someone reports and says, hey, this other person is threatening me, this other person is attacking me, both of them end up in solitary. So even trying to advocate for yourself can end up in that situation.
Yeah.
People who were complaining that somebody threw something at his head and he was placed in solitary confinement despite having been attacked. And then we go into food insecurity. I mean, there's a lot more in that section. I really out, but we talk about food insecurity, and I'm going to read this description that someone gave me of what his lunch was. Lunch today was a third cup of beans, a fourth cup of canned corn, 1 to 2 pieces of lettuce, a half a piece of bread, and a baby spoon-sized serving of something unidentifiable without color, no condiments. And then amazingly, we were able to calculate how many calories that lunch contained. 198 calories. The minimum should be 500 calories per meal for a healthy caloric intake. And we go into provisions. We talk about, the most mentioned thing was that the way the food was coming out was cold, was spoiled. People were eating it just because it didn't seem like it was like handled and stored sufficiently. People reporting that their dietary restrictions were not being respected. Actually, this is also a cool thing we have in the report. You can see an example of a kite, which is a request form that somebody inside fills out when they have a need. This person was writing that because of religious reasons, that they were vegetarian, and also that they had dietary needs. They were gluten-free. They were not able to eat gluten, and they wrote it and they said, I've reported this so many times. And the response was, I do apologize. Moving forward, we will correct this. But this was an individual who was struggling with this happening, and it had happened various instances. Then no variety in the food. And then when people do try to get commissary items, what's available in commissary also tends to be very processed food. Cheetos, a can of, or not even a can, but the cup of noodles, things like that. And just not enough fruits or veggies. And we talk about how food is, how there's deprivation of food used as punishment. So people were punished either because they were trying to save their food or because they were having their food withheld. There were certain people who didn't want to sign a form for their deportation, and they were withheld food while the detention center was hoping that they were going to sign a form for deportation, all the way until the shift changed and it was different guards who finally gave that individual their food for the day.
So they're hungry all the time, in addition to being sleep deprived and medical care deprived.
Right, right.
You want to talk a little bit about how much I was really impressed with how much a cup of ramen cost. I think
Yeah,
ramen's like 50 cents a pack. And why don't you
in
talk about that?
$3.02 in detention. And remember, you paid $1 a day. So people have to work 3 days of labor in order to afford a pack of ramen.
Yeah.
12 ounces of sugar costs $4.78, which is 4.5 days of involuntary labor. One box of instant rice costs $13.60, which is 13 and a half days of labor. One can of chicken breast costs $17.49 for a can of chicken breast. That is 17 and a half days of labor. And I see someone saying in the chat, and you said that family and friends can't bring them clothing or food. No, they cannot.
What
They
about
can.
what about if they have money when they get arrested? Can they use that money?
No. Their personal items are all set aside and supposed to be given to them upon release. Unfortunately, we've heard of so many cases where the items are lost or just not saved with them or with their name, including very disturbingly high rates of important documentation like passports and IDs and things of that nature, which people then are, released or transferred, deported, and they no longer have that critical documentation.
Um, yeah, this report is just sobering. Um, you want to highlight any other? I know you have a lot of information in here. Um, why don't you talk a little bit about um their ability to be in contact with their lawyers?
Yeah. Yeah, so an interesting thing that we were able to feature in the report on page 44 is these graphs of where people are transferred from and where they're transferred to. So this was some data that the National AFSC office was able to find for us. And so this transfer network is a part of the difficulties with having legal support. ICE intentionally transfers people out of their state or out of the city where they're from so that they're further away from their loved ones and so that they're further away from their lawyer if they have one. People are not guaranteed a lawyer. They will not be appointed a lawyer by the court to fight their case. So, again, if you can't afford a lawyer or if you don't have a loved one on the outside that's able to advocate for you in that way and raise money for you and all of those things, then you will be without representation. Five of the respondents on this form indicated that they had struggles with securing legal representation and paying for it. And it was not something that we explicitly asked about. So we do intend to ask about it in the future, but people brought that up on their own without being prompted. And so that is a huge obstacle in this whole thing. As we know in this country, the Fifth and 14th Amendments are supposed to guarantee due process to everyone here in the United States, regardless of their immigration status. So even people who are here, quote, unlawfully, should still receive that fair hearing. And yeah, just based on the facts that I just stated, that is not the case. So it is really what we hear a lot, like at least in my personal conversations with people that are detained, is that like it feels like this is meant to break them, and it feels like it is meant to force them to feel like they have no other options. So with like how things are looking right now, um, people do often feel that signing a voluntary deportation is the most humane and dignified option for them because they don't have a lawyer to fight their case and they don't have the resources to stay in this country and to be free in this country. So, and that's, yeah, I think like I mentioned at the beginning, like that's a pattern in throughout the United States. In the last 3 years, at least 70% of people in detention do not have legal representation. When I go to court hearings to accompany someone, like you can see there's maybe one or two lawyers in the room, and the room is filled with people who are detained and don't have a lawyer. Um, so yeah, it's really obviously very unjust. And
So
just
this
reading.
is psychological torture, trying to get people to self-deport. Um, and I think what your report indicates is it's on purpose. It's cruelty on purpose.
Mhm.
Um, and what happens if someone self-deports? What happens to their family?
Well, I would love to say what I have seen happen. So, going back to what we talked about, the reason that HAND is so heavily involved in this work is because we are seeing families and people with children in much higher rates on the streets. I have families who were not struggling with housing instability, but they actually took in children of friends of theirs who were deported because otherwise those kids could have disappeared into the system, into foster care, into who knows where, and maybe never have the chance to reconnect with their parents. And so it's, horribly tragic that this is happening. It's tearing apart communities. And we need to be responsible. We need to act because this is not a common theme and argument and narrative is, personal accountability and responsibility. This is systemic. This is intentional by the system, by institutions in place to break down this family structure, to tear apart our communities at the very core of them, and to make it so difficult for folks to thrive and to be able to stay here. I have very high rates. Nearly every week, I get contacted by a family who is saying that their loved one was deported and they want to know how they can be reunited, but they're terrified of going to the airports because they are worried that they're going to be picked up and separated from their children. So even people trying to find ways out to go back to their loved ones so their family can be a unit again, they are being, threatened on the way out that they could be put into this system. And so you know, it's horrible. It's really a horrible process. Um, and actually, that brings us to a great point in transition. So, this is where we need to really talk about what that means if our community is hurting. There are people who are detained and who need support. They need volunteers. They need folks to go in to hear them. They need people to call. Sometimes they're bored. I had a guy who said, "Can you just send me some Sudoku?" And we couldn't even send him Sudoku. We sent it, it went through the mail, and he didn't receive it because they decided for whatever reason it was contraband. He couldn't even have a book of Sudoku puzzles. And so folks are losing their mind and they're saying, you know, I can only call my family so much, but I know that this is negatively impacting their mental health. Can I call you and just talk about things? Can I talk about what we saw on TV? They're keeping up with the news, they're staying informed, you know, they're wanting support in that way. Then we really need folks who are interested in case management, the folks who are on the outside, the loved ones, the people who are living with them, who all of a sudden are without housing. I have a case of a woman who is in her 70s. Her partner of 17 years was detained and deported. Her son-in-law reached out to us because she was not able to pay the rent, and also because he was the primary caretaker. He was making sure that she was taking her medications on time. He was taking her to medical appointments. And all of a sudden that was yanked. And so she lost her housing. She went in to live with the son in law, and that increased the burden on them as well. They had to find somewhere to live because they were not planning for that and they needed more space. They didn't have a room for her. And so this is a cascading effect in our community. So sometimes we need folks who do case management. Or can you give somebody a ride to a medical appointment? Can you go with this person and her kids so that she's not terrified of going to the hospital, many of whom are also now mandatory ICE reporters? Ridiculous. You know, all of these places that should be safe, a court, you know, when people go for immigration court and follow the process legally, we need folks who are showing up and supporting and accompanying there. I have a case of a woman tomorrow morning, and she has a court case, and she's pregnant and has two kids, and she's in the shelter system, and she is terrified of going in person to her court. And we were able to get it switched to a virtual hearing because of her pregnancy. But we need all of these things, and we need people to plug in with exactly the skills they have, with the time that they have, and show up in so many different ways. And so we would really love to invite everyone who's on this call to a few events where you can learn more about this. You can personally get involved. We have an event tomorrow, which is a vigil, and these were weekly vigils that have started ever since Jeanette was detained. It was something that she asked for community to do, to meet weekly outside of the shutdown geo facility, or not shutdown geo, sorry, the ICE geo facility in Aurora. And so a lot of organizations and groups have been doing those vigils. Hand is hosting that tomorrow. You'll hear about our volunteers and the experiences they've had connecting with people. You're going to hear directly from folks who were detained and deported. Potentially, we're going to have testimony from someone who was actually sent to El Salvador, to CCOT, and his family thought that he was going to die there. We thought he was going to die in a concentration camp. He just had his 21st birthday.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Well, I think that one thing we need to do is you and I need to get together so that we can make a list of all of these volunteer options because we have
yes,
2,000 members across the state and we need to be able to hook people up into something that fits their comfort zone of activism, but there's
absolutely.
opportunities to help at every single level. One
Exactly.
thing I do want to mention, and that is the information in the report about the effect of people in the detention center when people are protesting outside. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So broadly speaking, anything that we do outside of the facility can and will have an impact on the people that are inside. And so we try to be very intentional with any direct actions outside. That is part of the reason that we have weekly vigils because we kind of want to create a container for those actions to happen.
And they're outside of visiting
Because
hours.
yeah, because what happens is people get punished when we protest or when we hold a vigil outside. And that punishment often is visitation being canceled for the day. So people will drive hours and hours or get on a plane to come see their loved one, and then visitation is canceled. The GEO staff will turn off phones. They will restrict access to microwaves, tablets, lots of different things in retaliation. And that could be like that has happened when there are two people outside on a Saturday morning and they cancel visitation for the entire day. So we try to direct people if they want to do an action, we encourage them to do it within the vigil time frame at least of 6 to 8 p.m. on Wednesdays. And then otherwise, if they want to have maybe a more meaningful direct action, that might be better to do in a different place that is not having such direct negative impacts on the people that are already trapped inside and their loved ones. So that might look like going outside the office of a certain representative or elected official. It might look like going to the ICE field office in Centennial and protesting there. So we do try to like spread the word as much as possible. A lot of people have good intentions and they want to do something that's meaningful, but there is always retaliation for that. And yeah, we will be sure to send an email to you, Kathy, with some information for next steps and like volunteer opportunities. But I also just wanted to mention Casa de Paz, which is another organization that we work with. And they have a very cool volunteer opportunity, which is to be a pen pal with someone that's in detention. So for folks that are across the state, it's a nice way to have a relationship with someone. There's no like minimum number of letters you have to send, but it's really accessible, and not everyone can go to the facility or do the phone call. So there's lots of different opportunities, and we'd love to explore those more with you all. And then, yeah, lastly, I'm just going to put our petition in the chat, which is a really easy step if you want to sign it and say that you think this place should be closed. We obviously encourage that. And then for any folks that live in Aurora with the petition, we're capturing where you live, which town you live in. So there are actions that are more targeted at the Aurora City Council at every level of governance.
Yeah, this has been devastating to know that our country is basically psychologically torturing people for no point, and destroying families. Is there any other thing that you want people to take away from this?
Just, this is really a opportunity to confront your own humanity and morality. And I do think there's personal responsibility for all of us. I think it is very easy to get carried away with a lot of rhetoric around this administration. And sure, absolutely, they've upped the severity. However, this is all possible because the foundation was laid for many administrations before then, for many, many years. And because it was slowly normalized over a period of time and still is in a lot of ways. And so it's really important for each of us to confront, what does it mean, right? When a child has her father taken away in front of her and, violently grabbed by random men while they're going to a court appointment. I mean, what does that truly mean when this is becoming a normalized aspect of our society? And I think that each of us often gets to a place when, if we think about it too long, we feel powerless and we feel overwhelmed with what is happening. And the antidote to that is truly community, is truly taking action and plugging in and finding a way, any way, at any level to be involved. And with each of us involving ourselves at whatever level we're at, it doesn't matter if you have a life career doing this or if you are just now, this year, this moment, being radicalized enough to take action, but we are all necessary in order to pull the various threads of the same fabric until it falls apart. And I want you to really be encouraged by your own personal power and your autonomy and your fight, because they cannot take away our thoughts. They cannot take away our heart and our conviction and our dedication. And so let us make sure that we are truly materializing in and manifesting in this real physical world the morality that we believe in our minds and in our hearts of what is right and what is good.
Well, thank you very much. This has been horrible, but and uplifting at the same time. I think we
Yeah.
all have responsibility and we can all do something to make it better.
Do
Um,
not let their risk and what they had to go through to make this possible go to waste, right? This
yeah.
was a very serious step for them. There were very real implications. And so this was supposed to impact you. This report was for you to hear it, to understand it, and to take action based on the reality and the knowledge that you now have and cannot ignore.
Yes,
So,
and also follow up in 3 months with the next report, because this is a continuing issue. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been incredible. And I know that everyone who stayed on the call was really changed by your words.
thank
I
you.
think we're going to end here. Um, I'm trying to see how to stop the recording, and I
I
don't.
hope to see you tomorrow for
Oh yeah, definitely, everybody.
Yeah, 6 p.m.